and good morning. It is such a blessing and an honor to be here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington. And I want to thank Reverend Dr. Peebles for her warm hospitality and also for her continued social justice work that takes place in the community and in the world. I want to thank my friend Tracy, who organized me to be here. And Tracy, thank you so much for your continued tenacity and work. And I want to recognize also my friend Zaina Zam, who's in the audience. She's a Palestinian poet and activist who lives in Virginia here. Raise your hand, Zaina. Amen. Sort of proud of her. And Maya, that was powerful. Thank you so much. And the youth who have sung this morning. And I'm just so blessed to be in you all's presence. I want to lift up a couple of scriptures, if that's all right. One of them comes from the book of Leviticus. Hear these words. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. You shall not steal, you shall not deal falsely, you shall not lie to one another, and you shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not defraud your neighbor, you shall not steal, you shall not keep for yourself the wages of a laborer until morning. You shall not revile the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord. You shall not render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not profit by the blood of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate in your heart any one of your kin. You shall reprove your neighbor, or you will incur guilt yourself. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And then the other reading I want to lift up comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 46 to 48. And it reads this way: For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your Creator is perfect. If you would join me in a moment of centering and prayer. As we look at these texts, we ask that you cause a light to shine from them so that we might perceive the word for our time, for this day, for this moment in which we live. Allow us to be transformed and to grow in accordance with what we see there and what we hear. Bless us now as we endeavor in this message today. Bless us and let us feel your presence. Amen. Now I got to warn you, I am a preacher, all right? That means that sometimes I get excited. And when I get excited, I get worked up. And when I get worked up, I get a little bit loud, all right? So I already warned the folks who are handling the sound to just turn the mic down when I get to that place so that I won't blow your eardrums away. I want to take some time and speak on the subject of being politically correct, And I see that you have as a theme during this February, identity. And I'm not sure all that you mean in that word, but it speaks to me because I've been dealing with this whole thing around narratives and how we view ourselves and the stories that we use to define ourselves, identity that comes out of that. But I want to just share with you a story that not too long ago that happened to me. It was before the elections in November, and I appeared on a TV panel at WJLA TV, and the subject matter was being politically correct. The person I sat opposite was upset because he felt that the current dictates in society caused him to have to be politically correct, and that him as a white person, he explained, was fed up with that. He said that he resented that he couldn't speak about blacks and other people of color in the ways that he wanted to speak about them. He was upset that he felt pressure to have to talk about women in respectful ways, and that he had to show deference even to those who were physically disabled. He felt that he could not talk about the LGBTQ community in the ways that he wanted, but that he must be respectful and inclusive. And he almost said that it was breaking his heart to stand there and have to be respectful to all of these different groups of people. He was bothered that there were people in this country who were undocumented, unable to speak English, and taking up space, as he would put it, and jobs that should be afforded to whites. And to make matters worse, governments were shielding them with this thing called sanctuary cities. He was terribly bothered that his whiteness felt challenged, and that he was discouraged and even afraid to speak in the ways that he truly wanted to speak. He said that it was blacks and other people of color and women and people that were on the margins that demanded a place in the midst of society that took away his rights as a white man. That everything about the world that existed around him made him feel like a stranger, he exclaimed, in his own country, and he could no longer be freely white. In one of our heated exchanges, I found myself asking and saying that I don't know what kind of mother raised you, but my mother taught me to respect others, to not call people out of their names, and to address my elders as Mr. and Mrs. I was taught to hear people's stories and to treat people with the dignity and respect they deserved. In other words, I was taught proper manners and to give respect in order to get respect back, and to treat people as I would want to be treated. I was taught that by my mama. So I don't know what kind of mother raised you, I said to him, but my mother raised me to be politically correct, to treat people the way that they wanted to be treated, the way that I would want to be treated. Now, this is really what political correctness is about, but the politics afoot in this country has turned respect, treating people right and fairly, into a liability rather than an asset. In this political season and its aftermath, it has taken rudeness and hatred and xenophobia and racism to a whole new level. And I guess my opponent on WJLA TV has what he wanted, and that was to be white and rude and racist again. But there are still, for those of us who believe, these teachings and other teachings that come before us. It just happens to be these teachings on the lectionary this week. And if you know anything sort of about a Protestant Christian church, some of us choose to follow a lectionary. A lectionary are assigned readings that come up every week on the calendar. And I choose to follow the lectionary because it prevents me from avoiding the text that I don't like. And so I have to engage in this discipline to even wrestle with the stuff I would rather not talk about, I would rather not teach. And you see, this thing comes up, and so it confronts you with this message of what does it mean to live in a society? What does it mean to be brothers and sisters to one another? What does it mean to exist in a society in a way that we really exercise justice and inclusion? These teachings, they ring out, and they challenge our sense of religiosity, our sense of spirituality, and our politics if we only listen and heed the calling of this text. Now, this text in the rule-making book of Leviticus teaches how to live in a society where you are connected and have responsibility to your neighbor and even to the stranger. There is a radical understanding in this text of our relationship and responsibility to our neighbor and even the stranger. But what I realized that in this world of racists, I didn't mean racists, I meant white evangelical Christians, they avoid these texts and look instead for personal sins, and they avoid the collective sin of culture and of systems, white supremacy, sexism, and capitalism. They avoid with a passion the verses that challenge the white evangelicals and the so-called conservatives' narrow interpretation of the world. They would rather not have these texts, be confronted with these texts in their exercise of their religiosity. They avoid the very many texts that addresses selfishness and narrow-mindedness and a mean-spirited religious people. We avoid the passages that challenge our biased views of life. As I think about this and look around where we are as a nation, I realize as a nation, we are a religious nation. Hear me now. We are a religious nation, meaning a nation that goes through the rudiments of religion and without really practicing the meaning of it. That we know when to stand up for a hymn and when to sit down. What proper words to say, like God bless America, but we don't mean it, right? We understand all of these things, these superficial trappings of religiosity, and we call ourselves religious, but we're no better than the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees of Jesus' day, that were weighing people down with obligations and rules that they themselves could not even bear up under. We are a religious nation, meaning that we live by a code of what you can do. Don't do that. That is sin. That is an abomination. That is going to destroy society. That's going to unhinge the culture. That means that you are not a child of God. That means that you are not human even to be regarded as all. We're a religious nation. We are religious as a nation, but being religious, it prevents us from living into the spirituality of openness and generosity, care of our neighbor, and a sense of responsibility to those on the margins. We don't need one more religious movement, and we don't need one more religious person, but we do need a lot more spiritual growth and a lot more spiritual endeavor. The religious people avoid the text that takes you into a deeper spiritual context with your neighbor and develop a deeper connection in our role as people responsible for each other. Developed spirituality is when you see in your neighbor sacredness and holiness. It is when you see, even in the stranger, the image of that which is holy and that which is divine. Developed spirituality is when you live life not as a controlling endeavor, but as an encounter with the tremendous gifts and stories and experiences that inform us. These scriptures are scriptures that attempt to lead people to be caring and engaged with the marginalized, a help to the community, and a positive force in the midst of society. These texts are radical, and they demonstrate to us just how little the religious right knows about spirituality. The religious right or the political right, and the two are almost indistinguishable, state that they believe in a Judeo-Christian value system, and yet they miss the major parts of a spiritual message, that you treat people fairly, that you do unto others as you want others to do unto you, and you love your neighbor as yourself. They ignore these major directives of a holistic spiritual life, that we live in a world with others, and in living in the world with others, our mandate is to make the world a better place for all people, and particularly those on the margins of life. Now, if you notice in this text, in Leviticus, it starts out advocating that when you pick your fields, that's the context of the day, right? People, it's an agrarian culture, so people are farmers. So when you pick your fields or you pick your vineyards, that you're not to pick them clean. from a capitalist perspective, we go, wait. It's my field. And I should be able to do with my field what I want to do with my field. I shouldn't have to leave something in the field for those no-do-good folk, those poor folk. I shouldn't have to share what I have with the community or with humanity. It is not the American way. It is not the way of capitalism. But the mandate of the text is trying to teach that to live spiritually in a community means that even your blessings should bless somebody else. Even your blessings should bless someone else. I have a saying that I always try to teach my folks, is that the blessed of us should help the rest of us until the rest of us become the blessed of us. We're called to engage in such a way. Don't pick your fields clean, it says, but leave something for someone who's hungry. Allow them into your field so that someone can be blessed, if only for a moment, from your blessings. There is in this text a social responsibility. If we look at this text closely, it is a lesson on how to live in the human community and truly be neighbor to your neighbor, understanding that from your fortunes you help someone else, that we have a responsibility for more than ourselves. And I think that's my problem right now, is that what everybody is talking about is very narrow and is very selfish, right? Folks could vote in a racist justifying it on, I'm going to get a job. You're going to destroy an entire country, an entire community predicated upon your own selfish ends. To forget about everybody else and to focus on some little job that they're going to try to bring back that's going to end up polluting the environment even more. That's going to end up destroying the earth even more. Right? That is a very narrow and selfish agenda. And what the text is trying to teach us is that our mind, our spirituality has to be bigger than just ourselves. That we got to understand that there is an interdependency in the world. And if the chain gets broken, then the chain is broken and all humanity ends up broken. We're called to live to a higher vision of what the world could be. That even the stranger should not be a stranger to me. That even the alien should have a place that they can feel home and comforted. I went into my cleaners the other week. And there's a woman that I always talk to who takes my clothes at the cleaners, Latina. And I said, how are you holding up under this mess? Because we had been talking about the politics coming up until now. And she says, there's nothing I can do. She says, but what I've done is I've pulled my children out of school and they're in hiding. You hear that? We should all be concerned. If you look at this text, that there is no justification for a travel ban if you look at this text. If you look at this text, you realize that we need to share our resources with the world, that we should not buy into these ideas of scarcity and fear. If we have faith, fear should not be a part of our faith equation because our faith can conquer any fear. Somebody believes me in that? Y'all quiet to you church, amen? I got to work hard, that means, just to get a response from you. Amen, amen. You know, I had to deal with Plymouth in that because I always call Plymouth the chosen frozen folk, and I had to get them to begin to respond and to come alive a little bit because, you see, when we come into worship, it is a participatory experience. Amen? That's right. You don't need to be silent. Amen. And you know, but what I'm looking at in this text is the fact that we should be shaken at our core in terms of spiritual values because we have negated spiritual values. In fact, I always say that there's something, when you look at these elections, a lot of folks got exposed, right? There's the police keepers on morality, right? That evangelical right wing ain't have a word to say. Ain't have a word to say in some of the most despicable language used. Didn't have a word to say in terms of some of the attacks upon immigrants and people of color. Didn't have a word to say. It showed you the hypocrisy of these folks. And one of my friends who went with me to Israel, who's an evangelical preacher, and he was a Christian Zionist before he went to Israel and Palestine, and he came back another man after he saw what was going on there. But he said something to me that was very unique, I thought was very powerful before the election. He said, you know, I've listened to this, and my heart is tore up. I realize that these folks that I've been listening to are not theological, they're ideological. That they have avoided the text, the compassion of the text, the liberation of the text, and the radicality of the text. That we're called in the text, if we're true to the text, we're called to live into this new vision of inclusivity. That nobody is left out, nobody is excluded, nobody is a half human being, nobody is left on the margins, but all folks are gathered together in the same spirit of humanity and in the same spirit of divinity. We're reminded of that. And so I'm just going to say that I'm glad my mama taught me how to be politically correct. I'm glad my mama taught me how to do that. My mother died last September, and she was 101 years old. And so her life was a victorious one. A simple woman, never had much education, but you wouldn't know it because she knew something about everything. And it was great, sound advice. You know how we use that word all the time when we talk about the salt of the earth? She was the salt of the earth. Right? Folks say that I like to fight all the time, and I love to fight. You know, I can fight. I can duke it out with you. You know why? Because my mama taught me to fight. And I'll never forget when her sisters was up there just talking about my mother and trying to tell me a little bit of my mother's history. And I remember my Aunt Susie, who I loved very much, she says, your mother loved to fight. Said she could whip anybody in the neighborhood, right? And that was her reputation. But she stood up for her neighbor. She never really fought for herself. But she was always at bat for somebody else. For somebody that she might have just met along the way. Somebody who needed something. Somebody who felt put upon. Somebody, somewhere, she was advocating for. And that became a part of my spirit. And the thing I want to end with in this text is that I know that folk get sometimes in good UU churches are worried about God and the mention of God and the Lord and divinity. It's not all of you, but some folk. I used to pastor that Third Unitarian Church in Chicago. So I know. But one of the things in this text, if you remember, hearing the word from Leviticus, it kept coming back saying, you do this because the Lord, your God, is watching you. If you understand what the writer is doing, the writer there is basically posing a threat, right? A threat, saying, if you don't do this, I'm watching. If you don't do this, I'm going to get you. If you don't do this, I'm coming for you. If you don't treat the alien right, I'm watching and I'm coming for you. There's the threat. The writer is using this device of a threat. And that's because we are very tribal. We are very individualistic. We really don't want to engage. We want our stuff to be our stuff, and we don't want to have to share our stuff with anybody else. And so the writer used the device of a God that was watching and said, going to get you. And I have a tendency to like that because I want a God to get some folk in the White House right now. I want a God to get some folks in Congress right now. I want a God that is going to hold a judgment on those who have negated the divinity of life and the humanity of life. I want a God that is going to act. And most importantly, when I heard a story in Palestine when I was there, And it was a way that one person put it, one of the bishops. He told a story about a guy who buys a garden. And the garden is in bad shape. And so he spends time taking all the rocks out the garden. And he spends time weeding the garden. And he spends time trying to recondition the soil in the garden so that it could grow something decently. And finally, he has a garden that's producing all kinds of vegetables. And his friend comes and says, wow, you caused this garden to really, really grow. And the man said, well, earlier, he says, that garden was God working by himself. God got a little help this time around. And so what I'm saying to you is you're the help. You're the help that we're waiting on. You're the help that we need. You're the help that needs to focus on your neighbor. You're the help that can begin to change this society. You're the help and the hope that can begin to speak some rationality and some love into the midst of the world. Thank God that some folks still are holding on to being politically correct. I'm going to be politically correct. They said, there's Graylan, he's being politically correct. I'm going to be politically correct because I'm going to live to my mother's legacy. I'm going to live because she taught me to live and to hope and to trust in people, to be an aid and a help in the midst of the culture. I'm going to live that way, and I'm going to invite you to be politically correct as well. God bless you. Amen. Thank you. Thank you.
And Pastor Hagler, I would like you to offer us a blessing.
As we prepare to adjourn from this time together, let us pledge to go forth from here and to be the agent of change, to be the ones who bless and the ones who remind folk that we are related to each other, and mean-spiritedness will not take us anywhere. Only the gift of love and inclusion will do that. Go forth and serve, go forth and teach, go forth and share the light. Amen.